Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host. The Yao Mean of Revolution was the DC Afghan shooter. Was that a false flag? By the C.I.A. and Mossad? Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. We got to look into this because this has something to do with everything that's going on. A little message from the small hats for Trump and everybody in D.C. to do what they say. They got plenty of child soldiers running around here ready to kill.
It seems that tragedy always strikes around a national holiday. And this year, in 2025, it happens to be Thanksgiving.
On the eve of a national holiday, we begin with a national tragedy. Two members of the West Virginia National Guard on crime-fighting duty in Washington, D.C. were shot and critically wounded today.
An Afghan national named Rahmanullah Lakhanwal has been identified as the suspected shooter in the ambush attack that killed one National Guard member and wounded another just blocks away from the White House on Wednesday, says the Department of Homeland Security. According to Jeff Carroll, the executive assistant chief of the D.C. Metro Police Department, the suspect was subdued at the scene of the shooting and taken into custody by National Guard members and law enforcement officers. Interestingly, Carroll said the suspect appeared to be a, quote, lone gunman that raised the firearm and ambushed these members of the National Guard as they patrolled near a mass transit station in downtown D.C. A horrific incident, in my opinion, whichever way you look at it, regardless of your politics, but there are some very interesting and peculiar things the mainstream media doesn't want us talking about. Per my research, on November 20th, which is just 6 days prior to the attack, Google search trends showed a small but documented and noticeable aberration in searches for one.
Now, remember, before the Charlie Kirk assassination, it was a small country with some small hats that was doing this type of research too before the killings took place.
Rahmanullah Lakhanwal originating from the DC metro area. I then zoomed in to look at more closely the search activity for just the day of the attack, and I was absolutely shocked, just floored by what I saw, because look at that. There is a massive spike in searches for Lakhanwal in the wee hours of the morning of November 26th. Once again, that is the day of the attack. A spike, I might add, that completely dwarfs even the number of searches after the news of the shooting broke later that afternoon. Here is a screen recording that I took just to make sure the evidence is preserved, which, by the way, has already been wiped by Google. Of course, the question still remains, why would there have been people searching for this guy's name a week prior to the attack, and then another massive spike in the early morning hours the day of the attack? That strikes me as very strange. Another very strange data point, 4 days prior, someone, probably multiple, most likely, in the state of Israel was searching for the name Sarah Beckstrom, the National Guard soldier who tragically lost her life during the November 26th attack in D.C. What is that all about? Well, it has since been uncovered that the alleged shooter, Rahmanullah Lakhanwal, was, in fact, a former CIA contractor in Afghanistan.
Authorities confirming the alleged attacker, 29-year-old Rahmanullah Lakhanwal, drove across the country from his home in Washington state to carry out the shooting. Confirming, too, that the married father of 5 was a member of an Afghan army unit in the city of Kandahar that worked closely with the CIA, brought to the United States amid the U.S. military withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021.
This individual is in this country for one reason and one reason alone, because of the disastrous withdrawal from the Biden administration and the failure to vet in any way, shape, or form, this individual and countless others.
Ooh, Kash Patel, seemingly always 3 steps behind. Clearly, now you can see he's playing politics instead of trying to actually figure out what the heck happened. Because officials say that, yes, Lakhanwal came to the U.S. from Afghanistan in 2021 during the Biden administration and applied for asylum in 2024. But according to 3 law enforcement sources, Lakhanwal was granted asylum yet again in April of 2025, this time under President Donald Trump. So the big question is, was he really a quote unquote lone gunman, or could this have been something more? Something like maybe a domestic false flag operation or maybe even a U.S.-Israeli joint foreign operation. None of those things, by the way, I'm ready to conclude as of this moment. But I think the sheer fact that these theories are widely floating around on the internet, and they are, just go look, is, I think, a direct indictment of the massive level of distrust in our government and legacy institutions. Because think about this. If we were just to rewind maybe perhaps a couple of decades, Occam's razor, right? The idea that the simplest explanation for a phenomenon is usually the correct one for this situation would be, hey, this guy has seen some really horrible and violent things in his lifetime. As his childhood friend has told the media, right? He was, quote unquote, disturbed by the casualties his unit had caused in Afghanistan, and thus probably maybe struggling with a host of mental health issues. And for whatever reason, it bubbled up and manifested itself in this kind of violent decision that he decided to take against members of the U.S. National Guard. That explanation seems kind of reasonable. But in 2025, that explanation is no longer Occam's razor. Because earlier this month, The Blaze published a bombshell investigative report alleging that a Capitol police officer was possibly involved in the planting of pipe bombs on January 6th. The FBI, led by Kash Patel, has, of course, poo-pooed this claim, but Representative Thomas Massie of Kentucky claims a whistleblower has alleged that an FBI cover-up could be at play here, and he directly called out Kash Patel in this recent tweet. Let's talk about Thomas Crooks, the young man who tried to assassinate Donald Trump last year. Another potential cover-up, as we have just learned. In this case, a claim that he was possibly recruited by a mysterious figure named Willie Tepes, who allegedly started pressuring Cooks to commit violence. We also know of past cases of entrapment where our three-letter agencies would literally go and radicalize Muslims living in America to do violent acts against America. So at this point, I don't think we can simply just trust the authorities unless, of course, they provide strong, irrefutable evidence to back up any of the claims they are making. But even putting aside this sort of controversial idea that this could be some kind of CIA deep state false flag operation, that the shooting was somehow staged or manipulated in order to manufacture a crisis, even discounting that, perhaps the most important question that I think we have to ask right now is who benefits? One of the most rabid pro-Zionist members of Congress has already used this incident to justify anti-Muslim hate, okay? He's writing that he was an illegal immigrant Muslim terrorist, just attacked the National Guard. The time for soft words is over. We, of course, know that he was not actually illegal, but granted asylum by both the Biden and Trump administrations. And just going to put this out there, might there be a country in the Middle East that Randy loves a lot, who might benefit from increased negative opinions of Muslims and or Muslim nations amongst Americans? Just asking the question. And speaking of Trump, we know of his desire to beef up domestic military presence.
Cities that are troubled. And we're sending in our National Guard. And if we need more than the National Guard, we'll send more than the National Guard because we're going to have safe cities. We're not going to have people killed in our cities.
Well, what better pretense to send in more troops to American cities than those very troops getting attacked by violent, lawless individuals? In fact, he has already leveraged this shooting to deploy an additional 500 National Guard members to DC. This, I don't know if you know, comes just a week after a judge ordered an end to Trump's troop deployment in DC, calling it, quote unquote, unlawful. These are, I think, all legitimate questions that Americans should be asking. The last thing I will say for today is that the answer to America's general malaise, whether we're talking about the economy or crime, is definitely not to give more power to centralized authority, because the most likely outcome of that will simply be a continued erosion of our civil liberties and more resources being diverted away from the day-to-day needs of everyday Americans. That is it for me this week. Let me know what you think. What are your theories?
shooting in D.C., Sarah Beckstrom, who was only 20 years old, has since died. There's some weird things going on here, folks. We're going to get into a little bit about her backstory, get into some details there. And then also, I want you to keep in mind, the fact that this suspect, as we talked about the other day, was recruited when he was very young, apparently 15 years old, recruited to work with the CIA. This dives into a little bit about this early programming that can happen, early on in someone's life and what that means ultimately in the end. So the suspect, we went into his background the other day. He worked with the CIA, so he was on the U.S. side, like he was on the side of the United States. We're going to get into a little bit more about that asylum that he was granted apparently under the Trump administration. But ultimately, we're also going to talk about what these Google trends are showing. I showed you the other day that the Google trends did show that the suspect's name was searched for prior to the shooting. And now you're going to see a little bit more information about that with Sarah Beckstrom. It's getting weird out here, folks. It's getting weird. Let's go ahead and get into this clip here when it was announced that Sarah Beckstrom has passed away.
Brooke, what do we know about the National Guard member who died?
Nick, National Guard member Sarah Beckstrom is being remembered this morning as a hero. She was just 20 years old from Summersville, West Virginia. Beckstrom served since 2023 and had been in D.C. since August as part of President Trump's deployment of troops in the Capitol. War Secretary Pete Hegseth wrote of her death, "An American hero. May our nation kneel in prayer for her family." Dozens paid their respects to her in a Thanksgiving night vigil in West Virginia overnight. President Trump called her outstanding.
She was savagely attacked. She's dead. Not with us. Incredible person. Outstanding in every single way, in every department. This horrible.
24-year-old Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf was also shot, also from West Virginia. He entered the service in February 2019. And like Beckstrom, he has also been in D.C. since August. President Trump said that Wolf is still in bad shape and fighting for his life this morning. Nick?
Let's pause here for just a second. Now, many are arguing that those National Guard troops should have never been in D.C. to begin with, right? Like there are a lot of people that are saying like she would still be alive. He would not be in critical condition if they weren't in D.C. I'm going to tell you a little bit here about how Sarah Beckstrom felt about that assignment from her boyfriend. So we're going to get into that as well. But the reality is here, folks, we have to seriously stop and look at everything and how it has played out in front of us. Again, just a couple of months ago, there was a gentleman who was a pro-Palestinian activist. Also, they said at one point was associated with PSL. They said he drove across country to kill two people in D.C. that were pro-Israel activists. They are telling you now with the suspect in the National Guard shooting that he drove all the way across country to assault Sarah Beckstrom and the other gentleman there. Sound familiar? But with this particular situation, it is out in the open that he worked with the CIA. And more information is coming out about that. And I want people to think about this. What type of organization tries to recruit someone to basically kill people at 15 years old? He was recruited at 15. So that is early programming that is being done by our intel here in the United States. No one can scrape that. And this is really important because what Donald Trump is trying to do now he's trying to increase the immigration policies to make it so that basically, if you're Muslim, you can't come to this country. This isn't a first. He did this before under his first administration. I don't know why some people are acting surprised. I've noticed this online. Some people are acting surprised. I'm like, he did this during his first administration. But ultimately, the end goal here is to make you fear Muslims. It's to increase that fear of the Muslim population. I believe they want to get it back to the post September 11 fear. I believe that's what they want to put in place once again. Because again, as long as you are afraid of the Muslim population, then you're not afraid of Israel. or you're not looking at Israel in a negative way, or maybe you may try to twist yourself into a pretzel and defend Israel. We cannot ignore the fact that the support for Israel within the United States has decreased to historic levels. We cannot ignore that. And that is a reality. And I'm here to tell you that if Israel needs to work with the CIA, if the Mossad needs to work with the CIA, not like this has not happened before, they will do whatever it takes to try to change that perspective. Now, it wasn't an issue so much on the left because that is kind of expected, but it is increasingly an issue on the right when you have young conservatives who are now pushing back on Israel as well. We can point to the death of Charlie Kirk as another example, that it was revealed, and had it not been, and this is something people need to think about, had it not been for Candace Owens revealing those group text messages, we probably till this day would have never known that Charlie Kirk wanted to walk away from the pro-Israel donors and wanted to walk away from that whole pro-Israel cause. We probably would have never known about that. So while there are many criticisms to be made about Candace Owens, that is one thing that we would not have known because Kash Patel and them considered this to be a closed, shut case. And that was it. So keep that in mind. Don't people find it strange that all of these incidents are happening back to back to back to back? Oh, and of course, all under Trump's presidency. We haven't even made it through the first Trump year yet. Come on.
Berg, what more do we know about the accused shooter and how he ended up here?
Well, Nick, records show the 29-year-old suspect came to the U.S. from Afghanistan in 2021 under the Biden administration. Officials say Rahmanullah Lakhanwal arrived here through an operation which evacuated tens of thousands of Afghans after the Taliban takeover. He has since lived in Washington state with his wife and possibly 5 children. Records show his asylum application was approved this year, but federal officials say they are reviewing that this morning.
His asylum application, he came here under the Biden administration, but his asylum application was renewed under Donald Trump. And that's important because Donald Trump is blaming this all on Biden. First of all, I got to say something very clear. Joe Biden is not president anymore. That may have worked for Donald Trump at the beginning of his term, but dude, it's November. Joe Biden is not president anymore. You can't continue to blame everything on Joe Biden when you have been president now for almost a year. So it was his administration that approved his asylum application. Trump's administration that did that. And Donald Trump is trying to point fingers at everybody else or call it fake news, etc. But that's what happened. So I'm here to tell you guys, look, this is only going to fly for so long. It's only going to fly for so long, this idea of this party blaming the other party and the other party blaming that party. More people are starting to see that both of these parties are corporate. Both of them are corrupt, especially when it comes to something like foreign policy. Both people are starting to see that. So Donald Trump really has you took on that under his administration. He took that on. So he really needs to be looking at himself. That being said, also think about why he came here. He came here because of the operations that were done in Afghanistan, which he was working on the CIA side. He wasn't fighting against the U.S. He was working with the U.S. and he was programmed from the time that he was 15 years old. Let's not sit back here and pretend as though we all of a sudden don't remember or forgot that the CIA used to do these MK Ultra, experiments. How do you know those things still aren't happening now? We also need to question this idea about AI. I told you AI can be used for good or it can be used for bad. We know because of my reporting that Israel has increased their involvement in the tech sector. That tech has been a big investment for them. How do we know that Israel isn't using some type of tech or AI to also program people? Now, I say this and people say that may be far-fetched, but seriously, after all the things that we've seen happen with intel agencies, you think that may be far-fetched? I wouldn't put anything past it. I wouldn't put anything past it.
He resided in Bellingham, Washington with his wife, and we believe 5 children. And we're working very closely with our federal partners, especially DHS and the FBI, to review his immigration history and the vetting process itself. What we know about him is that he drove his vehicle across country from the state of Washington with the intended target of coming to our nation's capital.
Again, across the country, drove across the country.
We have also learned the suspect, while in Afghanistan, worked with the U.S. government, including the CIA. Investigators say he has no prior criminal record here in the U.S., and it is too soon to know a motive. Nick?
And no prior criminal record. That also is very, very, very telling. So let's get on to a little bit more information here about C.I.A. Beckstrom. Now, I told you as well about these Google trends. I want to show you guys this here the other day about Rahmanullah. He was trending on Google prior to the shooting. If you look at Google Trends, people were searching for his name prior to the shooting. Now, wait till you see what is revealed about C.I.A. Beckstrom. Watch this.
Per my research, on November 20th, which is just 6 days prior to the attack, Google search trends showed a small but documented and noticeable aberration in searches for one Rahmanullah Lakhanwal, originating from the DC metro area. I then zoomed in to look at more closely the search activity for just the day of the attack, and I was absolutely shocked, just floored by what I saw, because look at that. There is a massive spike in searches for Lakhanwal in the wee hours of the morning of November 26th. Once again, that is the day of the attack. A spike, I might add, that completely dwarfs even the number of searches after the news of the shooting broke later that afternoon. Here is a screen recording that I took just to make sure the evidence is preserved, which, by the way, has already been wiped by Google.
That part right there. You see, why has Google erased that information? So again, if there was nothing to see there, the information should still be present, but they've deleted it. Why? So shout out to James Lee for recording that and getting an actual screenshot of that search, because that's the thing nowadays, guys. You got to get screenshots, because all of a sudden information just seems to disappear. Imagine that.
Of course, the question still remains, why would there have been people searching for this guy's name a week prior to the attack, and then another massive spike in the early morning hours the day of the attack? That strikes me as very strange.
Also, a week prior to the attack, remember, he wasn't in DC yet. So for people who are saying, well, it was him searching for his own name, those searches came out of Washington, D.C. He wasn't in D.C. yet. So why? So hello? Like what is, put 2 and 2 together. Now check this out.
Another very strange data point. 4 days prior, someone, probably multiple, most likely, in the state of Israel was searching for the name C.I.A. Beckstrom, the National Guard soldier who tragically lost her life during the November 26th attack in D.C.
In D.C. Why are people in Israel searching for C.I.A. Beckstrom's name? Not in D.C., in Israel. Now, some people are saying, oh, that's not real, it's fake, it's da-da-da-da, but you can look this up for yourself. I think they've already deleted this one as well. But James actually looked at it. So that's the thing. This is what I've been trying to tell people. James actually looked at it. This is wild.
See, what is that all about? Well, it has since been uncovered that the alleged shooter, Rahmanullah Lakhanwal, was, in fact, a former CIA contractor in Afghanistan.
Authorities confirming the alleged attacker, 29-year-old Rahmanullah Lakhanwal, drove across the country from his home in Washington state to carry out the shooting.
Again, drove across the country. Let's go to the second part here, because we went over that part already the other day. Let's go to this part here. Pay close attention.
Because officials say that, yes, Lochinwall came to the U.S. from Afghanistan in 2021 during the Biden administration and applied for asylum in 2024. But according to 3 law enforcement sources, Lochinwall was granted asylum yet again in April of 2025, this time under President Donald Trump.
So that wasn't even that long ago. This was just a couple of months ago. So in April. So again, under the Trump administration.
So the big question is, was he really a quote unquote lone gunman, or could this have been something more? Something like maybe a domestic false flag operation, or maybe even a U.S. Israeli joint foreign operation. None of those things, by the way, I'm ready to conclude as of this moment. But I think the sheer fact that these theories are widely floating around on the internet, and they are, just go look, is, I think, a direct indictment of the massive level of distrust in our government and legacy institutions. Because think about this. If we were just to rewind maybe perhaps a couple of decades, Occam's razor, right? The idea that the simplest explanation for a phenomenon is usually the correct one for this situation would be, hey, this guy has seen some really horrible and violent things in his lifetime. As his childhood friend has told the media, right? He was, quote unquote, disturbed by the casualties his unit had caused in Afghanistan, and thus probably maybe struggling with a host of mental health issues. And for whatever reason, it bubbled up and manifested itself in this kind of violent decision that he decided to take against members of the U.S. National Guard. That explanation seems kind of reasonable.
Could have been a number of things. But what we do know is that he worked with the CIA. And here's another thing. Donald Trump is saying that people need to be vetted before they're allowed to enter the country. Didn't his administration vet him? He was granted, asylum under his administration. Anybody else find it strange that the same year that he was granted that asylum is the same year that the shooting took place? Just a couple months later? It really makes you wonder.
But in 2025, that explanation is no longer Occam's razor. Because earlier this month, The Blaze published a bombshell investigative report alleging that a Capitol police officer was possibly involved in the planting of pipe bombs on January 6th. The FBI, led by Kash Patel, has, of course, poo-pooed this claim, but Representative Thomas Massie of Kentucky claims a whistleblower has alleged that an FBI cover-up could be at play here, and he directly called out Kash Patel in this recent tweet.
Yeah. And then he brings up this part here, and this is another thing. Notice how you don't hear anything about this anymore? You had a presidential candidate who, when they were running, there was an assassination attempt on their life. Notice you don't hear about it anymore? Kind of weird, don't you think? Open shut case, right? They just said this was the guy. So pay attention to everything that's happening. You got to remember, again, with intelligence agencies, like these people have been known to infiltrate many different spaces, the media, military, organizations, activist organizations. They've been known to do that, been known to do it. So no one's going to come out and say, hey, I'm intel. Whoopity-doo, hey, it's me. Yeah, they're going to blend in. And they tend to blend in very well. Now, I want you to hear what C.I.A. Beckstrom's boyfriend said about her deployment, how she felt about that. Listen to this.
Treated in and other things regarding his treatment. In the meantime, our colleague Gabe Cohen spoke to a gentleman named Andrew Carr, who is the former boyfriend of C.I.A. Beckstrom, the Guard member who was killed in the shooting. They lived in West Virginia. And Gabe asked the former boyfriend what C.I.A. Beckstrom felt about her deployment to Washington. Take a listen.
Did she believe in the mission of being there? Did she think it was important, or did she think they didn't belong there, the West Virginia National Guard?
It was mixed. She got deputized in there, and they gave them no rights to do anything. She was like, people spit towards us, cuss at us, throw things at us, and we can't do nothing.
Well. So he is telling you that she said they're there in DC, but the National Guard, that they're not even allowed to do anything. So why are they there? This is a revealing moment, guys. This is a misuse of the military. I said this from day one. A lot of people didn't agree with me. I said it from day one. They should not be there. And now you hear it from her boyfriend that they're not even allowed to do anything. So why are they there? If you pay attention to the increase in AI, pay attention to what's happening with Palantir as well. We talked about that before a couple times on the show. And then, of course, you know, this increase in crime that they keep telling you about. Donald Trump, with the help of Peter Thiel and Israeli intelligence, they are preparing to ramp up a police state across this country. It's what I warn people about, this idea of a real life Minority Report. Watch the movie if you haven't seen it, where they can go ahead and predict if said person is going to commit crime and arrest them before crime is even committed. Who do you think that's going to be used on? Do you think they're going to use that on rich people? No. You think they're going to arrest rich people for, hey, it predicts that you might commit embezzlement. You might embezzle funds. No. They're going to use that on poor people, Black people, poor Black people, immigrants. Pay close attention. So all of these factions are working together. Edward Snowden tried to warn people about what was coming.
She couldn't detain nobody. She couldn't stop them from doing wrong. It was like they told them to call the cops. She wanted to make the difference. She wanted to extremely. She was happy with it. And she just was also like, why am I here if I can't do nothing? Where they limited them so much, she's like, it's pointless. She's like, I get why we're here. Crime's bad, but it's pointless if we can't do anything.
So there you go. Again, why are they there? West Virginia is one of the poorest states in the country. One of the poorest. And I caution everyone once again, guys, if you can do so, and I know sometimes you can't just leave, but if you're in a position to do so, get out of the military. If you're a young adult and you're listening to this, don't join the military. I've been telling people this, and some people say, well, your family was military. Yes, they were. And I'm telling you from experience, don't join the military. Unfortunately, because West Virginia is one of those poorest states in the country, military, they prey on places like that. They tend to go to, the recruiters tend to go to areas where the population is more impoverished, where there's not a lot of money to be had. And they usually prey on those people. Join the military, join the National Guard. You'll get all these benefits. You'll get to travel. You get to see the world. And I know how it works. So I don't know, guys, like something's got to change. Obviously, I do not support the violence that is taking place. I don't support that at all. And at the same time, I'm just asking guys, just don't join the military. Just don't. But something nefarious is going on here. We're going to continue to follow the story. Pay close attention. Hey, guys, this was a savvy clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.
Your inspection sticker expired. Yeah, they know. Call Joe Biden or call George Bush. What's your driver's license? No, there's no. I don't have a driver's license.
Right there.
Why not? Go back, sit in the fucking car, and leave.
No, sir.
No?
It doesn't work that way.
Okay, so go ahead, do whatever you want to do.
Can I get your name?
No.
No?
No. People don't get a disability fucking, I have kids and I have a lot of fucking bullshit things. So why you fucking treat me this way?
Okay, obviously that was about to get too graphic to show, but that was Fairfax, Virginia police pulling over a guy named Jamal Wali, an ex-Afghan soldier who worked with the U.S. military. They pulled him over a couple months back. He started spazzing out. I hate this country. You people brought me over here. I can't get a job. You're not helping me. They started asking him about he had a concealed carry because you can get that with the green card. They ended up fighting. He pops two of them. They don't die, which is good. So he has a case coming.
When I call them bullshit, the system is fucking broke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you're going through a really rough time.
Man, I should have served with fucking Taliban better than you. I was concerned and a fucking dumbass fuck when I was concerned about Taliban, but in America, since 2014, I'm concerned about more about you people. Because you lie, because you play games, that's how I'm going deeper.
Okay.
Yeah.
So these are my partners here. They're coming up.
That guy was possibly in something called a zero unit, but who definitely was in a zero unit was Mr. Lochnawal. That's the guy who shot the two National Guardsmen, one fatally in D.C. That's the big deal case. So it has now come out for sure. This isn't fringe journalism. They've tracked his records.
I also spoke to Director of the CIA, John Ratcliffe, last night, and Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. There is confirmation now that the subject had a relationship in Afghanistan with partner forces.
Several 100,000 Afghanis, including this Wally who shot the captain in Virginia, and now this Lochnawal, who unfortunately took the life of the guardsman in D.C., were processed and vetted faster and better than any immigrants almost ever in history because they had been helping the U.S. military, some of them for many years. Lochnawal, the guy who did what he did in D.C., he's 29, he has a wife and several children. And once Trump came back into office and kind of messed up the path to citizenship, he started having a hard time getting a job. But he had been let into the country back at the end of Biden's term. Remember when we fled to Afghanistan after that totally pointless.
He would have been vetted by the U.S. government, including the C.I.A. And then once he was granted temporary asylum, as he applied for permanent status, he would have gone through a variety of different layers of vetting. Those include identity and background checks, biometric vetting, in-person interviews, assessment of an individual risk, and eligibility under U.S. law. So that's several layers. And then it's important to remember, too, the ultimate approval and of his asylum application was granted under the Trump administration in 2025.
Important in the context of the president and allies saying that this was the policy of the previous administration to let folks in without vetting. Important to keep that in mind. Zach Cohen, thank you so much.
Time of being there. Well, I guess it wasn't pointless. A bunch of people made a bunch of money. So there's several 100,000 Afghanis in the country that fought in some capacity for the U.S. and may be very bitter now that they're being denied access to full citizenship. You can't deport them. I mean, I hope he wouldn't deport them back to Afghanistan. That would be a death sentence. And a lot of these guys are trained, hardened soldiers. These are not Mexican or Honduran men who ran across the Rio Grande because they want to get a job so they can send money home to their family and are going to be in a Home Depot parking lot. These are hardened soldiers. And specifically, Lochnawal, the guy that did the DC action, he was part of something called a zero unit. Starting at the age of 15, his zero unit was connected to Ahmed Karzai. Ahmed Karzai, if that name sounds familiar, he was one of the brothers of the president. And Ahmed Karzai was also, per Interpol, per WikiLeaks dumps of CIA internal documents, he was the biggest hair opium grower. Well, they would grow the opium, turn it into heroin, and sell it to customers in the country. Interesting Detroit connection to that. If you remember from my Motown Mafia documentary, and we got part 2, Beyond Street Dreams, wrapping up now. Back in the 70s, the Brown family and the Jackson family were getting massive amounts of H from the Gambino crime family in New York. They had a huge one of the biggest rings in the country, so they did time. They get out. Courtney Brown, the second in command, meets an Iranian in prison, and we'll tell you their adventures. But long story short, when they had an even bigger run during the 90s, which culminated in them getting caught. They tried to do one last deal in like 2002 or something, like when the Afghanistan stuff was what is it? 9/11, 2001. Yeah. So yeah, 2000. Yeah. Okay. So 2002 or 3, they tried to do a deal, one last big deal, 18 kilos of pure coming in. The person on the Pakistani side had been compromised, but the person that was above Courtney Brown's father in the food chain, there was only 6 people in the indictment. Courtney Brown's father was the only American. Everybody else was Pakistani and Afghani. And the head lead guy, Mohammed, he worked a deal. He told something, but what he was able to tell was on activities probably with this Hamid Karzai guy, because this was at the time when bin Laden was hiding in, well, they thought he was hiding in Waziristan, the tribal lands where the opium was grown, where Hamid Karzai would have been part of that whole scene. So what was going on with what the U.S. was letting certain people get away with, not only back then, was coming home to roost in the sense of there was H coming from Afghanistan to Detroit and going into the booster projects and on a daily basis for years. Not to say that wouldn't have happened without there being a war, but the U.S. helped those guys. And this Locknewall, the shooter from D.C., at 15, he was in one of these zero units. These zero units are connected to CIA operations. So CIA is governed by different rules than the military. They don't have to report stuff. And a lot of them are contractors. They're not actually U.S. government employees. They're being contracted by the U.S. government. So they can do sort of different things, or they can hide things. So JSOC, basically special operations, Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Delta Force, would attach themselves to these CIA groups so that they could all just kind of do dark operations that, I mean, maybe they were helping us and saving us. I'm not going to say they weren't, but they were responsible for a lot of the dark stuff. And just so for those of you that don't watch a lot of the YouTube military thing, you think there's a lot of guys with YouTube prison channels? There's even more Navy SEALs. And there's like 3 of them who claim they're the one they shot bin Laden. So these special forces guys are, I had a long conversation. I was supposed to interview a special forces guy. He talks on the internet. Maybe, I don't know if he ended up not wanting to be interviewed by me or our logistics didn't work out. I'm not going to say his name, but he told me some pretty, it wasn't mind-boggling once I thought about it, but, and this isn't secret information, the personality profile of special forces, it's almost exactly like a psychopath, except in one area it's turned to have respect for authority. So you can make them a soldier and send them somewhere and say, well, the people in that house, kill them. And they don't ask questions. Well, it's children. It's this, it's that. Doesn't matter. So so not only are these several 100,000 Afghanis that are damaged. To finish my thought with Lakhnawal, at 15, he was part of one of these zero units, which were Afghanis that would be connected to the CIA and the SEAL stuff, and they would do things that they didn't even want the U.S. contractors or the Navy SEALs doing, things that were totally illegal, line people up against the wall and kill them. And he was doing some of it for this Hamid Karzai in aid, in effect, of his opium trafficking. So
there is a stunning new report this morning claiming that the brother of Afghan President Hamid Karzai is on the CIA payroll. Senior White House correspondent Bill Plant has more on that this morning. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning to you, Harry. Ahmed Karzai has long been a kind of poster boy for corruption in Afghanistan. The U.S. has a prickly relationship with Afghanistan's President Karzai, but it has been openly critical of the president's brother, Ahmed Wali Karzai, long suspected of involvement in the country's booming illegal opium trade. The new report says the CIA pays Ahmed Karzai on a regular basis for a number of services, including helping to recruit a paramilitary force that operates at the CIA's direction.
The timing of this revelation.
You have the CIA creating a 15-year-old assassin to help their opium warlord. And again, this is mainstream. I'm combining a bunch of articles, and this is all just coming out, but the paperwork, they got that work, as they say on the urban internet side. He was a CIA hire, let's say. He was in the zero unit. You're going to hear the PDF file word thrown around too, because I'm a little dubious. They say that there's this custom amongst a lot of the Afghan warlords that were also involved in the growing of the opium, of having these T-boys. So you have these 10 to 14-year-old boys who dance, which is one thing, and then supposedly do other things. And you have all these Navy SEALs claiming they hear, they would take the boys in another room and we'd hear them screaming, but we couldn't do anything. Well, you could have done anything. See, those are the type of guys you have to have in special forces. The people that really don't do anything if the U.S. got, hey, you're a soldier, you'll do anything at all. You don't question anything. But as the Nazis found out at Nuremberg, following orders is not a defense for certain war crimes. You can't just say you were following orders. If there's ever, again, a strong president, a real president, some of these military people are going to have to be held to account. And I'm not necessarily talking about just the guys in the field, or maybe they shouldn't be held to account at all, but the command and control structure that created these scenarios. Let us not forget Abu Ghraib, where they acted like that elaborate torture was, the soldiers just came up with that on their own. No way. And so, yes, this guy had grown frustrated, Lakhnawal. He was living in D.C., couldn't get a job. Once Trump got back in office, his green card thing was messed up. He was calling around trying to get help, trying to get a job. And he snapped. Again, that doesn't make it okay to go shoot 2 National Guardsmen. Just like we know of stories all around the country, unfortunately, of U.S. servicemen who snap. A lot of them are SEALs, again, that special force and Army Rangers and Delta Force and all the special forces, and just general military guys who are exposed. Some of them, seeing their friends get blown up and children get blown up, it's very damaging. And that special operations guy, I said, is it true about, being special forces, being on small deployments in different parts of the world and hitting licks, there's $400 million in gold that this dictator has. We can kill him and take it. And then, because there was a series of weird things that went on with Navy. There's a good book out, Fort Bragg Cartel. It's a separate story, but lots of murder within the U.S. Special Forces. And now we have another set of nuts disgruntled Afghans who we trained to do even dirtier work for us. And this guy, Alak Nawal, who did the shooting in D.C., was one of them. So that's some food for thought. So go read up on those, read up on that stuff. Zero.
Was trained by the CIA, and he
He's
was
the
in
CIA death squad.
He was in a death squad.
Yeah.
That they went out and committed atrocities, and he was a member of them since he was a kid, since I think he was 15 years old for 10 years.
That's right. Yeah.
So they got
And
him
the
young.
story, yeah.
They had him traumatized because they had him commit all these atrocities. And if you know anything about the MK Ultra and how they mind control you, they use your trauma to do that. So you know that there was the tragedy of the two National Guards men that were shot by a crazy wackadoo, they say, right?
You have the jokes, by the way.
Yeah, crazy wackadoo. But guess what? Genghis Khan says, let me predict how this plays out. This is from September 8th. Okay. Let me predict how this plays out like the futurist I am.
Mm-hmm.
There will be a big gunfight. There will be infiltrators from the CIA/Mossad who will kill multiple National Guard. They will pose as gangbangers. They will be used as justification for martial law and disarmament.
Mm.
Whoa.
Well, good luck with disarmament. I think that's a tall order.
Okay, so I just want everybody to sit down and buckle up because I don't want this to shock you.
Thank you.
But it turns out that the Afghan national who shot those National Guardsmen was a CIA asset.
No.
Bert, I know it sounds crazy. Come on.
Since when?
I know. Come on, Mr. Everything is a conspiracy. So this is what happened. The judge halts Trump's deployment of National Guard in Washington, D.C. That was November 20th. Boom. 2 National Guardsmen injured in Washington, D.C. shooting November 26th.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. The timing's perfectly normal for this to happen just as the country wakes up to actual oligarch hand around the world's throat. Wow. So there it is. Here is Genghis Khan goes on. He says, so here we have Pam Bondi confirming because the 2 National Guardsmen got shot in Washington, D.C., the Trump administration will be flooding as many American cities as possible with the military. Cities that have zero to do with the shooting. Are you awake yet? Let's listen.
Working hand in hand with Secretary Noem, Homeland Security. Director Patel has already arrested 500 suspected terrorists since January 20th. We're working hand in hand with Pete Hegseth. And yes, we are bringing in our National Guard to every city we possibly can. Who needs our help? And that's a lot of them. We're tied up, as you know, in a lot of court hearings right now. These young men and women in the Guard, they want to help our country. They want to be here. They are patriots, yet they will not be attacked by a radical Islamic terrorist who screams by reports, Ali Akbar, before shooting 2 of our Guard members and almost killing more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, can you?
Lies. Ali Akbar.
So there you have it. And here he is. That's the guy. By the way, did I reference Laurel and Hardy? I'm sorry, I meant Mo Howard and the Three Stooges. Because that's
what is it with that haircut in MK Ultra Mind Slaves, dude? What is it that the shooters have this bowl haircut? What is going on? Is that the bowl that they program you with, like Zoolander?
I'm surprised he didn't shoot his barber.
Yeah, that's what I've said about 3 shooters. There's 3 shooters I said that about, you know?
Hey, recent immigrants to America, how would you like to serve your... So this guy was trained by the CIA. And he was in
CIA death squad.
He was in a death squad.
Yeah.
That they went out and committed atrocities. And he was a member of them since he was a kid, since I think he was 15 years old for 10 years.
Right. Yeah.
So they got
And
him
the
young.
story- yeah.
They had him traumatized because they had him commit all these atrocities. And if you know anything about the MK Ultra and how they mind control you, they use your trauma to do that.
Well, you don't have to believe bad things about America, Jimmy. I'm not disloyal. Think of African child soldiers. They would make them kill people. They make them kill their parents and smile while they do it to break them. So don't think of it as thing your good country did. Think of it as something Africans do. If that helps you get your head around the evil of what runs you.
Hey, recent immigrants to America, how would you like to serve your brand new country by joining the National Guard, make money, a school degree, and finally have power over everyone who hates you for being here?
Yeah.
And we get you a gun legally.
Yeah.
So
Wait, yeah.
there you go.
Wait, that sounds like ICE recruiting more than even.
Yeah.
I don't believe the story that the guy's friend says that he was mad about the crimes he committed in Afghanistan. If he was a kid and they've been using him since he was 15, I'll bet you he's much like Ryan Routh.
That's right.
In fact, I think he comes up in this, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
Attorney General Pam Bondi says we are bringing in our National Guard into every city we possibly can in the wake of the CIA-linked Afghan shooter in D.C. last week. The Solari report, you remember her, Catherine Austin Fitz, used to work inside the Bush administration, and she's now turned a truth teller about all the corruption inside the government. She says Pam Bondi describes the shooter who worked for the U.S. government for 10 years in Afghanistan and then brought into the United States by the U.S. government and just happened to shoot and kill a National Guardsman right after a court ordered the National Guard out of Washington. Bondi announces that the National Guard will now invade urban America in time for the 2026 election. So,
well, they're disarmed, so yeah, maybe it'll work, huh?
Yeah, maybe it will. So, I just want to. This guy, Dr. Alex Zek, had a great. He says, so a Muslim, former CIA contractor from Afghanistan, shoots 2 National Guardsmen who were deployed to D.C., shoots them in the head. By the way, those 2 guardsmen not on board with that mission. I saw the one dead guardsman boyfriend was talking, saying that was not on board for that mission. Right after the Trump administration normalizes military presence in cities, invests $500 billion towards AI infrastructure. Imagine if they did $500 billion towards our actual infrastructure.
I wouldn't dare.
Imagine if they gave us actual high-speed. Imagine if we had the stuff that China has. Just imagine that. Healthcare. Anyway, allocates $1 billion towards the TSA surveillance upgrades with biometric checkpoints and facial scans. We're turning it to China without the cool stuff. We don't get the flying
None of the
cars.
gadgets.
What's that?
None of the gadgets, and without even the fairness of the Interior Ministry.
That's right.
There's no human Chinese touch like they have in China with their commie thing.
We don't get health care. We don't get high-speed trains. We don't get the flying cars. We don't get anything. We certainly don't get accountability in government. $46 billion for border infrastructure with AI towers and remote video monitoring. $6 billion for genetic-based identity tracking. By the way, they're doing all this while they're cutting your health care. Just to let you know. So as they cut your health care. $450 million to militarize local law enforcement with inspection towers, $250 million for counter drone tracking, postures towards digital IDs, etc. Whether it's real, staged, or somewhere in the between, it's also perfectly in line with the technocratic biosurveillance agenda, and fear of radical Islam and illegals is the perfect psychological cover to get liberty-minded Americans to cheer for their own digital prison under the guise of national security.
It's not as good as they think it is, I must say, Jimmy. And as a guy who was there for 9/11, and you could have emotionally moved me with radical Islam closer to back then. But now, Mamdani won in New York. Even if he's a phony, he won for a reason. The radical Islam thing isn't as good of a tag. It's not the communism of today, the way they think it is, you know?
Yes. People think that it's just so funny that they do. They think the CIA, the Trump administration, the Pentagon, Pete Hegseth, the FBI, like somehow they're on our side.
Yeah,
that's
the
just
figurehead,
funny.
Yeah, the mascot Pete Hegseth, who's not in charge of anything. I can't remember the name of the guy. It's a Ziocon name, but that's the real guy. These are all fronts. That's why they get AOCs and Momdamis.
That's right.
They get actors.
That's right. So I just want to remind everybody, a false flag is a horrific staged event blamed on a political enemy and used as a pretext to start a war or enact draconian laws in the name of national security. So as soon as this happened, you had all the people still loyal to Trump and not to MAGA. The people who are loyal to Trump and not to the country, which is totally different. Being loyal to Trump is being in a cult. You're supposed to be loyal to the policies that Trump ran on, which he's not following through on any of them. And so Trump has been turning his back on MAGA left and right. So a horrific staged event blamed on a political. So the reason I said this was because immediately after the shooting, all those people who are loyal to Trump and not the country were doing videos and tweeting out how we got the left. This is the Democrats rhetoric that inspired this nut.
Yeah, I think they're loyal to Israel and not Trump, by the way.
That's right. And as soon as they found out that it was a guy that the CIA trained, they switched from that and they went to, oh my God, we got to get these jihadists out of our country. It's these Muslim jihadists.
Yeah. And this is the same conservatives complaining about how we left our buddies that fought alongside us back there.
By the way,
this is one of them buddies.
And this guy was allowed into the country by Joe Biden and then given asylum by Donald Trump in April.
Yeah. It's bipartisan. That's how you know Trump sucked Bill Clinton's dick. That's how you know the story's true.
A false flag is a horrific staged event blamed on a political enemy and used as a pretext to start a war or enact draconian laws in the name of national security.
Yeah. You know how they get you the best? Remember Y2K, the panics going up to Y2K about that they didn't do a decimal they should have done and it's going to end civilization? And then it was anticlimactic. Nothing happened. But then what did happen? 9/11. So they get your anticipation up like a good horror movie or something. Get your anticipation up. And then jump scare. And that's how you control crowds of cows.
Now, what we've learned from the Charlie Kirk assassination is that you can see where people are doing Google searches and what they're searching for. And it's very helpful, revelatory into what's actually the game that's being played. And so this is the same thing. So the guy who killed those the CIA asset who killed the National Guard, 2 National Guardsmen in Washington, D.C., someone was looking him up on Google before the shooting.
Yeah. And I just want to point out, because everybody keeps forgetting, this pattern goes back to 2004 at least. I've sent you the files. Some fan, when I said someone should look into all the shootings, sent me it. And it's all the shooters you heard of. That has happened. All of them. And then his searches went up from sending it to me in Tel Aviv, and so did mine.
So here is breaking thread. The DC Guardsman shooting isn't adding up. Shooter Ramanallah Lakwana, I don't know how you say his name, CIA-backed Kandahar Strike Force vet.
Lockenwall.
Ambushed 2 unnamed guardsmen at 2:15 Eastern time yesterday, yelling Allah Akbar. Critical, but he's still alive. But Google Trends, his name spiked in DC at 2:24 a.m., 84 interests. And then at 3:28 a.m., 100, and bam, hours before the shots were fired. For knowledge, we need to subpoena the IPs. Well, here's what Lara Logan says. She says the spike in searches of this person's name in the hours before the attack means the people who knew this was going to happen were searching to see if he had completed his task yet. A known CIA asset who was a trained member of a covert unit of assassins. Make no mistake, whether he came to the U.S. on an SIV visa or a humanitarian parole, he has a sponsor, he has a handler, and a detailed dossier. They know exactly who he is. The question is, who was he working for on this operation? And just to let you know, more confirmation that he was CIA. CIA confirms that the DC National Guard shooter worked for the secret U.S.-backed death squad called Zero Unit 03 in Kandahar conducting nocturnal operations. His childhood friend in Khost confirms he was addicted to drugs and disturbed by the pointless killing that he inflicted.
It's plenty.
Right. So that's why I don't believe that backstory. I think that he's a programmed Manchurian guy, like Ralph, like all of them. Because the thing of, oh, what did I do? Well, you would think he would take it out on himself, wouldn't you? But shooting two random people that weren't there doesn't make any sense.
Right.
I know they're offering that as a thing, but I don't buy it.
So here's what Sumi says. The shooter's identity is out and the scandal lands squarely on Washington. The man who opened fire near the White House wasn't some foreign terrorist like the media rushed to imply. He was an Afghan soldier who spent 10 years fighting for the United States, evacuated in 2021 aboard American military planes, trained, armed, and funded by U.S. Special Operation Forces at the Kandahar base. In other words, the man they're now calling a national security threat is 100% American-made product.
Of course.
A leftover of America's disastrous war in Afghanistan. The U.S. recruited him, they trained him, they brought him into the U.S., and now the U.S. pretends to be the victim. Recruited at age 15 to kill for the CIA, assigned to a death squad run by top drug lords in Afghanistan, soul-destroying, murdering innocents on behalf of a pedophile heroin cartel, then brought to live in the alienated hell world of late capitalist America with predictable results. Well said.
It is, but wrong. No, I don't think that you necessarily do that because not everybody pops off like that. I think he's a child assassin asset that they could activate with the internet.
That's what I think.
With a phone call.
Yeah, I think that. He's not saying that?
No, he's saying like, oh, he snapped because
oh,
America
he's saying
sucks.
He just, oh, okay.
But that still doesn't make any fucking sense.
Yeah, right. So he goes on to say Zero Unit 03 was headed by Ahmad Wali Karzai, a highly paid CIA thug who ran the drug trade in Kandahar. The DC shooter was basically a Sicario. Now, a Sicario, that's a assassin or a hitman.
Killer, yeah.
Yeah. So he was basically a hitman for the biggest drug cartel in history, which the CIA created, armed, and funded. What's happening is blowback from a vast heroin racket. I don't think it's blowback. I think that exactly what you said, they activated him.
It's blow. It's not back. It's not coming back. They did it on purpose.
He goes on to say, like this guy and Jamal Wali, Mohammed Syed, remember him? The Afghan refugee who murdered 4 people in Albuquerque in 2022. He claimed to have worked for the Afghan National Army Special Operations Command. The CIA has brought about 10,000 of these hired killers to live in the USA.
Yeah.
So there you go.
When you see them on Sean Ryan's show, when they're doing the little CIA bullshit of like, there's ISIS
There's
people.
sleeper cells.
I don't mean the one visiting Trump. I mean, other ones are here right now.
Yeah.
They know because they brought them here so that they could do these things to you.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's how you know. When they say there's sleeper cells that are going to start attacking, it's almost like they have inside information about what the intelligence community is planning for the United States. And
it's almost like they have a bunch of Sirhans that are sleepers that they can wake up whenever they choose to.
And here's one that they woke up when they chose to. The guy who was trying to kill Trump at his golf course. Here's Mike Benz. He tweeted out this video, and this video is from last September. He says, worth remembering that the guy who tried to murder our president was also recruiting CIA-backed Afghan militias. So here he is when he finds it out. This is a funny video. This is Mike Benz doing some real investigation in real time, and then it comes up. Watch this. So what? Let's just watch. This is fun. So he's doing he went to his Facebook page. Who? Ryan Ralph.
What the fuck?
So then he goes and he watch this. So what is here it is. The U.S. Embassy in Ukraine is working very hard to finance this project and has asked the Ukrainian ministry. So that's him. That's Ryan Routh saying he's working.
Why does he have connections to that, this lunatic? That doesn't make any sense.
Well, there it is.
There it is.
There it is.
He's working with the fucking State Department.
He's working for the State Department, the CIA.
Directly.
Oh, Mike, don't look into Israel.
It's
You'll
right
be even
here.
more
It's on
shocked.
fucking Facebook.
Yeah.
A year ago. Less than a year ago.
Yeah.
Whatever you do, don't look into Israel, Mikey.
If you thought you were blown away by this nugget of info.
So, Gen X girl did a great segment. I wish I would have put it in my keynote and showed you, but she showed you all the people, how all the quote unquote Trump loyalists, who are actually traitors to America. Because if you're loyal to a politician, you're not loyal to America. To be loyal to America, and how they went from blaming lefties for this to immediately flipping and blaming Muslims who got to get the jihadists out.
I think they're all the same thing in my book, Jimmy. I'm a real simple man with a real simpleton brain. I hate these leftist Islamic terrorists.
And so those were some, and so they're the same people who are cheering on Trump's war of aggression in Venezuela. They're the same people who cheered on him bombing Iran, bombing Yemen. It's crazy.
Well, that's because Trump is, and I don't even dislike Trump. I think he's a charismatic puppet in service to who or what I don't ever want to see or meet. I hope.
Yeah, no matter who you vote for, you get John McCain. I don't know. I don't know.
Dark.
There's
That's
not
a
much
dark
to
thing to
like.
say.
There's not much to like in Trump. I had hope that Trump, when what he was campaigning on, he was going to try to fulfill it. And the fact that people were trying to kill him and they russiagated him, I thought he had a chip on his shoulder and a real grudge against the establishment and the deep state. And of course, I had hope. I didn't have faith. I had hope because we already knew what Joe Biden and Kamala were going to do. So maybe he was going to do something different. And I remember watching the due dissidence guy say, "Gun to the head. If I had to vote, I'd vote for Donald Trump. Gun to the head." Of course, they voted for the Green Party, but. So I'm saying a lot of people had hope that Donald Trump, what he was saying, but I didn't have faith. I did not have faith. I had hope, and of course, it's 100% no hope. He's all
look. At the end of the day,
he's
Hulk Hogan and the Iron Sheik weren't really going to kill each other. They both worked for Vince McMahon.
That's right.
That's the bottom line. He got your Hulk Hogan. For some people, now I had hope. I would never put faith in a politician. Because I just can't take that kind of disappointment. It would set me off like an Afghan that was brought here by Trump and Biden.
Hey, we live in an age of unprecedented
heroin cartel. So as you guys probably know, over the holiday, 2 National Guardsmen were shot here in Washington, D.C., and one of them actually succumbed to their wounds. We are learning quite a bit about the suspected gunman, who was an Afghan national, who was apparently part of our CIA-backed death squads in Afghanistan before coming over and being granted refugee asylum status here in the U.S. So to dig into this background and what exactly the hell is going on with it, we have literally the perfect person, Seth Harp, who is an incredible investigative journalist and also the author of the also incredible book, The Fort Bragg Cartel, which we learned is being turned into a series by HBO. Seth, great to have you.
Good to see you, man. Good to be with y'all. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So let's put E2 up on the screen. This is some of your writing on Twitter about who this guy was. You say he was recruited at 15 to kill for the CIA, assigned to a death squad run by the top drug lord in Afghanistan, soul destroyed, murdering innocents on behalf of a pedophile heroin cartel, then brought to live in the alienated hell world of late capitalist America with predictable results. Tell us what we know about him specifically and about the death squads that he was involved with.
Well, that statement that you just showed up there might sound hyperbolic, but unfortunately, those are all accurate statements of reality around this guy and who he was and what the what the zero units did in Afghanistan. Raman Walla Lakan, I'm sorry, pronouncing his name. He apparently was recruited at 15 to serve in what's called a zero unit. Zero unit number 3 was the one apparently that he was assigned to, also known as the Kandahar Strike Force, which was headed by a U.S. ally, a warlord named Ahmad Wali Karzai, who the top drug lord in Afghanistan is a fair way to describe him. He ran, what's the zero units were basically U.S. proxy forces that operated at the direction of the CIA and the special forces in Afghanistan, and they primarily did what's called night raids, euphemistically known as night. They're more like assassination missions, and they were used extensively throughout the country to kill people that the U.S. intelligence suspected of being Taliban. Whether or not they actually were Taliban is quite a different matter. And the reference to pedophilia there is the fact that a lot of these proxy forces, proxy militias, in fact, practiced something called bacha bazi, which was a really despicable cultural practice where underage boys were trafficked and sold. All of this ugliness is stuff that went on in the criminal client state that the U.S. American national security objectives in Afghanistan, the Kandahar Strike Force that he served in was in the middle of all of it. There's more stuff to it than that as well. Land theft, all kinds of criminality. So it's really sad to see that stuff blowing back onto to the United States.
Yeah, so let's put the next one, guys, up there on the screen. This is E3. This talks about his dark isolation. The community was raising concerns. Many of the people around him. Seth, I want to put my conspiracy hat on, and I'll just have you kind of steel man the official narrative is that this is somebody who was exposed to CIA death squad for years. He's brought over to the United States, suffered mental isolation. At the same time, we've seen many cases of people come to the United States. They're in a dark, they're in a fragile case. They have this killer background. Is it outside the realm of possibility? I'm not saying there's evidence or anything, just based on your interpretation, your experience of covering this. I mean, is there any likelihood or possibility of being prodded or influenced by some organization or others around him? I think a lot of people are asking that question, considering his background.
I mean, it would be irresponsible of me to just speculate about that without evidence. I do hear what you're saying. You know, what it was the Gusanos from Cuba of the 1960s, all the Cubans that were brought to Florida to train to try to overthrow Fidel Castro in the failed Bay of Pigs operation. Well, after that operation failed for years and years in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, those same veterans of the Bay of Pigs, they were used to carry out all sorts of off-the-books CIA and JSOC objectives. And all across Latin America, they did terrorism and drug trafficking at the behest of some of the shadiest actors in the American national security state. And so when you look at the idea that 10,000 of these the zero units, doing assassination missions for 10, 15 years, that they've all been repatriated to the US and are dependent on their CIA handlers for their immigration status, for their special immigrant visas, you kind of wonder, to what extent they're a malleable group of people that used and directed for all kinds of nefarious ends. But I don't have any specific information about this killer's motives. Lakan Wall is his last name.
Yeah.
You have pointed out, put E4 up on the screen, that there was another one of these Afghan mercenaries who you said was brought to the U.S. after Kabul fell, shot a cop in Virginia. You say, listen to the incredible rant he delivers before he snaps, and watch how smoothly he draws and racks his weapon. Obviously a professional killer at his wit's end. And I believe, Seth, didn't he say something like, I should have worked for the Taliban. I should have served with the fucking Taliban before he draws his weapon on the cops.
Yes, that video is very distressing and impressive. Hearing all the things that Afghan man says. He's another guy who apparently served in a zero unit or served with the special forces in the CIA. By the way, when we say these people served with the CIA, I should point out that these are substantially military operations. This is what they call sheep dipping, is where they say, okay, nominally the CIA is in charge of this mission, but we're going to attach like 30 JSOC guys or 30 Green Berets to this raid or whatever. And that way that they're exempt from a lot of the rules that normally apply to military operations in certain things, like lining people up against the wall and just shooting them, which is the sort of stuff that the Zero units did. But in any event, this guy, Jamal Wali, apparently also served in the same sort of capacity. And in the video, which is really incredible, 8-minute long video, when he gets pulled over in Virginia, you can see the sort of frustrations that he faces coming to the United States. And it's hard not to sympathize with the guy because, imagine being an Afghan who only knows the world of death and drug dealing that characterized occupied Afghanistan, to come over to the United States and try to make a life in a place like suburban Virginia and try to figure out things like getting a job and car insurance. And like, he's complaining that he can't get a job, that he can't get disability, and that he can't get a driver's license because he doesn't have insurance, which is the reason why the cop pulled him over. And you can just see that the guy is really, completely at his wit's end. More police are arriving on the scene and the tension is building, and the guy is armed. For some reason, he appears to be wearing his sidearm and ammunition like externally on a belt, which, that's legal in Texas. I don't know, Virginia. But when he finally makes the decision that he's going to escalate and turn this into a confrontation with the cop, I mean, the way he draws his weapon and racks it so quickly and immediately is able to turn around and fire a couple of shots, like underhanded, across his body at the police officer standing in his window, so smoothly shows, I just watching it, you can tell this is a guy who's been in fights probably. But, there was a cop at his other window who just really quickly put him down. But it's another really disturbing example of, violence blowing back or emanating from these guys that were brought to the U.S. with
I mean, it's about the clearest example of imperial blowback you could possibly imagine.
I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's been crazy about this, Seth, is that, we're reading the news and it comes out. CIA at age 15. Everyone's like, oh, it was CIA at age, and I'm like, hold on, say that again? Teenager working for a CIA death squad in Afghanistan, and we're just like all supposed to just accept that this is apparently normal. I mean, I didn't even know, based on your work and others later on, but at that time, nobody was going around telling the American people that this is exactly, what they're up to in Afghanistan. Combined, I think, with your book, what we're watching is an organized kind of effort for all of us to deal with, like you said in your book, about the blowback of what all these special operations, the mental toll and others, that this 20-year campaign, failed campaign, ultimately accomplished, and what it brought to our soil. That's the way I was looking at this.
Well, the idea that they would recruit 15 is perfectly consistent with the type of logic that the U.S. military and intelligence agencies bring to bear with these conflicts, because they certainly won't hesitate to kill somebody who's 15. They treat that as a military-age male. So there's no internal inconsistency there. But back now, I think, reflects the brutality and ruthlessness with which the United States waged war in Afghanistan for 20 years.
Christy Nome was asked about the killer's background. This is E1, guys. Let's go ahead and take a listen to that.
Why did he do this? Why did he drive across the country and carry out this brazen attack in Washington?
Well, the investigation is still ongoing, and we're allowing our partnership with the FBI and DOJ to continue to reveal all of the sources of motivation. But we do believe this individual, when they came into the country, we know he was unvetted. He was brought into the country by the Biden administration through Operation Allies Welcome, and then maybe vetted after that, but not done well based on what the guidelines were put forward by President Biden. And now, since he's been here, we believe he could have been radicalized in his home community and in his home state. So as we continue to talk to his family and his contacts, more details will be revealed, and we'll release those when it's appropriate. But this is something that for these individuals, when they're brought into our country, it's a dangerous situation. If you don't know who they are, if they're coming from a country that's not stable and doesn't have a government that can help you vet them, that we shouldn't allow it.
And she indicates that he, quote, could have been radicalized in the United States, which, you know, I would say probably the radicalization came from being on the CIA death squad at the age of 15. But, you know, they have an interest in making it sound like a scary Islam thing versus a scary deep state CIA imperial blowback thing. And then obviously like her thing about he wasn't vetted. I mean, in the context of being part of the death squads and being brought here, et cetera, he was quote unquote vetted. They knew who this guy was. They knew what he was up to. And also worth clarifying that he was actually granted asylum under the Trump administration. So they want to make it a partisan thing. They want to make it a scary Islam thing because that serves their interest in using this for a more aggressive crackdown on immigration from all sorts of countries. Trump has been talking a lot about Somalians lately too.
Yeah, I don't know what they mean when they say vetted. Vetted for what? I mean, I guess for connections to the Taliban,
right?
But it can't be for like terrorism or crime. I mean, the people that the U.S. worked with were the drug traffickers and the terrorists in Afghanistan,
right?
So I don't know what kind of connections they're looking for or looking to rule out. But yes, like you said, Crystal, in any event, you know, participating in death squad activities when you're still a teenager, I think that's sufficient to radicalize anybody. You don't have to look too much farther for an explanation, even though, you know, the precise, perhaps mentally ill reasoning that led him, you know, to that street corner in Washington, D.C., we may never know. But it's not really necessary to grasp at the idea that he might have been radicalized in a mosque in suburban Virginia. Yeah, I don't think so. I really doubt that radical Islam had anything to do with the shooter's motivation. I mean, that's why he was attacking National Guardsmen. It looks like he's lashing out at the people who shaped his life with military operations and brought him to the United States and basically set him up to fail and alienated community where, you know, a person from Afghanistan just has little chance, especially if they're dealing with all the accumulated trauma of having participated in violence and having killed people and having seen innocent people killed and probably having friends killed as well. So, Kristi Noem's statements can safely be dismissed in that regard.
All right, man. Oh, well, thank you so much for joining us, man. We appreciate you, your book, and everything. And the work you do is just so important. I remember the first
Bring Spencer Ackerman into this conversation. You have a new piece in Zateo headlined, "He Killed for the CIA in Afghanistan. Trump blames Afghan culture instead of Langley's." Can you elaborate?
Yes, your guests have spoken very eloquently about the betrayal and the dishonor that the collective guilt of Afghan refugees ascribed by the Trump administration for this horrific murder is having. What we're focusing on less is that the person who committed allegedly these crimes, Lachenwall, had a gun put in his hand when he was a child by the CIA. Apparently, when he was 14 or 15, he was brought into the Zero Unit number 3 around Kandahar. Apparently, his brother told the New York Times. Apparently, his brother, the New York Times reported, was a deputy commander of this unit. This unit was a death squad. The United States made this person into a child soldier and now is experiencing what I think is one of the most horrifically bright line cases of imperial blowback that we've seen throughout the war on terror. If the United States wants to find out whose culture is responsible for this horrific crime, it needs to start by knocking on doors at Langley. And as well, the Afghans who ran the U.S.-backed Afghan intelligence service known as the NDS. It was this culture of violence, of impunity, of murder for political reasons that had a specific role, we'll find out more at trial, of shaping Lachenwall and his circumstances. To blame the Afghans who came here as refugees, desperate overwhelmingly, as your guest said, who worked with the United States, who served the U.S. war effort, is perverse, and it is ultimately a cover for allowing the U.S. to continue to create death squads, to outsource its most murderous and its most despicable wartime actions to locals who then it can blame them for.
I was thinking about Timothy McVeigh, who was on the highway of death in Iraq. He comes back from there. He blows up the Oklahoma City building. He kills, something like 169 people. No one said then that all white Christian men should be imprisoned, let alone deported. But your thoughts on those kind of comparisons?
I think what we are really seeing is the horrific consequences of a violent, exploitative, and extractive U.S. foreign policy, once again, not for the first time, but once again, coming home. If the United States actually cherishes the lives of these West Virginia National Guardsmen, who should not have been in D.C. in the first place to backstop ICE, that's its own issue. But if the United States values their lives and values the lives of other service members and other Americans, then it has an obligation to, in the first instance, stop creating these death squads, to stop creating the conditions that are warping the people who serve in them to the point where they would commit horrific murders like these. That's a cherishing of human life that we never see from the United States in its foreign policy missions around the world.
Thanks for watching.
I have a question for all of you, especially those of you who support President Donald Trump. Do you think the US is genuinely fighting drug trafficking, or is Trump's Venezuela strategy a geopolitical power play? I'm looking forward to reading your comments on this one. In fact, post a comment now with your point of view and then watch the video. Subscribe if you haven't already. And then tell me at the end if your views have changed in any way. All right, deep breath. Let's dive in. So, Nicolas Maduro turned another year older. And instead of a quiet cake cutting, he ends up receiving two of the most politically charged birthday messages on the planet. Not from regional allies, not from friendly presidents, but from Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. You know a story is shifting when the two most powerful challengers to US global influence send the Venezuelan president letters that read less like happy birthday and more like we've got your back, publicly, loudly, and strategically. Putin's message? Unwavering solidarity with the friendly people of Venezuela. That's basically Putin saying, we stand with Maduro no matter what pressure Washington applies. Xi's message? Even sharper. China categorically rejects any foreign interference in Venezuela under any pretext. Categorically, under any pretext. Those are fighting words in diplomatic language. And Maduro, smiling on his weekly TV show, reads these letters to the nation. Because he knows exactly what they mean. He is no longer just a regional concern. He is a global flashpoint.
Yo con el teléfono aquí, Huawei, este Huawei me lo regaló el presidente Xi Jinping. Mira, ya tiene 2 años y pico. Y está, bueno, pues, perfecto. Huawei, lo recomiendo. Nadie se lo puede intervenir. Es inintervenible. Se puede decir, asesor, no se puede intervenir. O sea, un teléfono blindado a cualquier tipo de intervención, sea satelital o de cualquier sitio. ¿No? Ya va que me están informando de cosas aquí.
The Trump administration is painting an entirely different picture. In a memo shared with Newsweek, the White House links Venezuela to narco-terrorism and argues the US is effectively in a non-international armed conflict with groups tied to the region. When the US starts using words like armed conflict, it is setting the legal groundwork for military action. And then, without any warning, the post happens. Donald Trump jumps onto Truth Social and writes, "To all airlines, pilots, drug dealers, and human traffickers, please consider the airspace above and surrounding Venezuela closed." One line. No explanation. Just a geopolitical spark dropped into dry grass. Latin American governments sprinted to figure out what it meant. Airlines scrambled. Analysts dissected every word. Was this an ultimatum? A pre-strike signal? A deterrent? Or just Trump being Trump? Reporters asked him directly aboard Air Force One. And Trump, smiling, said, "Don't read anything into it." Ah, yes. Don't read anything into the President of the United States announcing that the airspace over a foreign country is closed in its entirety. Nothing to see here. Move along. Trump confirmed he had spoken with Maduro and then mysteriously added, "I wouldn't say it went well or badly," which usually means it went exactly how you might imagine a Trump-Maduro phone call would go. And here's where it gets more serious. The United States is expanding military operations in the Caribbean, not small patrols. We are talking about the USS Gerald Ford, a nuclear-powered supercarrier, plus a surge of naval vessels. Signaling presence? Yes, but much, much more than that. Signaling pressure. The move comes right after US forces carried out deadly attacks on boats in international waters, claiming they were drug traffickers. But then, the Washington Post dropped its bombshell. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth allegedly ordered the US Navy to kill everyone on board certain boats, including a second strike that targeted and killed 2 injured survivors. Hegseth denies it. Trump says he'll look into it. Republican lawmakers, yes, Republicans, are furious. Ohio's Mike Turner calls it potentially an illegal act. Nebraska's Don Bacon says it would be a clear violation of the law of war. When members of the president's own party sound like UN investigators, you know something is very, very wrong in Washington. 11 unidentified people on board a small boat were targeted and killed by the full might of the US military. Where is international law? Where is due process? Where are the West's human rights advocates? Were those 11 people really drug smugglers? The Washington Post quoted a DEA official who said, 11 people is an unrealistically large number for a smuggling op. It's more likely to have been illegal migrants. Smugglers usually have much smaller crews, especially for a boat this size. Think about it. The more people on board, the less room for drugs to sell. Trump, however, is totally unapologetic about the broader operation. You can see the boats, he says. You can see the drugs. Each boat is responsible for killing 25,000 Americans. How many of you actually believe him? Just hours earlier, President Trump announced a pardon for the former president of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez, who has been serving a 45-year sentence. For what? For partnering with drug traffickers who had allegedly shipped 400 tons of cocaine to the United States. And in September, Trump delivered the majors list to Congress, the list which identifies countries responsible for producing and transporting illicit drugs to the United States. There are 23 countries named in this, the 2026 majors list. 23 countries. Guess how many the US is bombing? 1. Venezuela. Not Colombia, not Afghanistan, certainly not China, India, Pakistan, which are all on the list. Only Venezuela. Why Venezuela?
No nos metemos con nadie en este mundo. Quieren robarse el petróleo. ¿Vamos a dejar que se roben el petróleo de Venezuela? Quieren robarse el gas de Venezuela. ¿Lo vamos a permitir?
Oil, the resource that the United States is the world's #1 consumer of. In fact, American demand for oil is growing. This year, the US used 20 million barrels of oil per day. That's the highest in 18 years. So while the US is the world's largest oil producer, its demand for oil is so high that it still needs to import about 30 to 35% of its total oil consumption. So if Maduro is right that it's about oil, why Venezuela specifically? If drug trade is the excuse that Trump is using to increase US control over foreign oil, then let's take another look at that majors list, Trump's own roster of countries responsible for drugs coming into the US. If we sort those 23 countries by the amount of oil they produce, look at what we get. The top 3 are China, Mexico, Venezuela. No question of attacking China, a nuclear-armed behemoth. No need to attack Mexico, which already sends 75% of its oil to the US. What's left? Venezuela. But now Venezuela has made it clear it's not alone. On live TV, Maduro thanks Xi and Putin for standing with Venezuela in an authentic and courageous way. He talks about a growing, fervent love for Venezuela around the world.
Y que con la China tenemos relaciones de confianza profunda, amplia, y establecimos una asociación estratégica a toda prueba para todo momento. Y estos momentos que le ha tocado vivir a Venezuela, la relación China-Venezuela pasa la prueba ampliamente y este momento ha sido para profundizarla y fortalecerla en todos los frentes de trabajo hoy por hoy. Así que esa carta del presidente Xi Jinping ratifica párrafo por párrafo, escrita de puño y letra, su solidaridad y apoyo a toda Venezuela.
But let's be real. Is this really love? Or is it leverage? Global positioning. 3 superpowers drawing lines in the Caribbean sand. And Venezuela, whether it wants to be or not, has become the stage for this collision. If the US pushes harder, China and Russia will respond. If China and Russia push harder, the US will escalate. And in between the pressure from Washington and the protection from Moscow and Beijing sits a country that has already weathered sanctions, internal turmoil, economic collapse, mass migration, and years of political fracture. This moment, this is something new. This is triangular tension. Xi and Putin have entered the chat. Trump has thrown the US Navy into the Caribbean, and the world is watching a small country become a test of global resolve. Is this really about drugs, or is Venezuela becoming the next major front in a global US, China, Russia power struggle? So tell me, do you buy the official explanation? Or is there something bigger happening here? And if it's oil, not drugs, will it stop with, let's say, a trade deal? Or is this only the beginning? If you support Trump's Venezuela strategy, have you thought about what comes next? I really want to hear from you. Subscribe to us.
Donald Trump has spent the last few weeks insisting he's cracking down on Venezuelan drug trafficking, despite offering no evidence for any of it. And now he's moved from sea to land, as if scaling up a military campaign is just another line in a speech. He's declared Venezuelan airspace completely closed, as if the United States suddenly owns South America. And he's doing it after more than 20 strikes that have killed around 80 people, with nothing publicly tying these deaths to the story he's selling. You can get away with that sort of thing when nobody pushes back, but Nicolas Maduro has pushed back, and he's pushed back in the one place Trump can't afford it, the global oil system. Because if this really is about control of the world's largest oil reserves, then Trump's problem isn't Venezuela, and Venezuela are going to make it everyone else who needs that oil stable and not seized. Right, so the thing about this confrontation between the United States and Venezuela is that once you strip away the slogans about the drug trafficking and the big declarations about closing Venezuelan airspace, what you're left with is a pattern people in Latin America have been living with for decades, and a president in Washington who is running the same script again, but without the evidence, without the legitimacy, and now without the geopolitical freedom of action the US used to take for granted either. So when Donald Trump goes onto his platform and tells airlines that Venezuelan airspace is completely closed, and when he tells US forces they will soon start operating by land after weeks of maritime strikes that have already killed dozens, he's doing something that relies on everyone else pretending they can't see what's really going on under all of this. And what's changed in the last few days is that Nicolas Maduro has very much stopped pretending. He's called it out as oil politics. He's called it out as an attempt to seize the world's largest reserves. And he's not just complained, he's taken it to OPEC. And that changes the shape of the entire thing now. The sequence matters because the escalation is not a theoretical one anymore. Trump has already pushed this further than rhetoric. And the United States has hit more than 20 vessels in the Caribbean and Pacific since September, killing somewhere around 80 people. And none of those deaths have been substantiated with evidence that have linked the targets to drug trafficking at all, as we well know by now. There's no intelligence briefings going around. There's no photographic proof of any of it, no documented shipments, no statement from the US Drug Enforcement Administration putting its name to the claim. All the public has been given is Trump's constant assertions that maritime routes are now 85% stopped, which is a number disconnected from any verifiable data set. He's just making it up again. Because the claim is not evidence, it's become the center of the story rather than the justification for it. You don't get to wage lethal force on the high seas and then say, the evidence will come later. We'll show you later. You don't get to escalate to land operations and offer the world nothing more than a percentage he pulled out of thin air. Or more accurately, you can, but people will draw their own conclusions about why the proof never ends up arriving, won't they? So this is where Maduro has been sharper somewhat than Washington expected. Not that that's a high bar if you're going mind to mind with Donald Trump, I suppose, because he's taken the part of Trump's story that is very much the weakest bit and used it to expose the part that is very much the oldest part. The United States has wanted Venezuela's oil for a very long time. That is hardly news to anybody, I dare say. It's not a conspiracy theory to say that, is it? It is the plain historical record. It's written into sanctions policies and into regime change efforts, into deals offered to US oil majors contingent on political transition. Venezuela sits on more proved oil reserves than any other nation on earth, and that fact shapes everything about how it gets treated. So when Maduro tells the global oil producers that the US is using drug war language to disguise an attempt to control those reserves, he's not introducing a radical narrative. He's taking the subtext and making it very much the text. Because OPEC exists to defend member states from exactly this kind of external pressure, because its political identity is built on the idea that oil producers should control their own resources, heaven forbid, Maduro has hit a fault line that runs through the entire global energy system here. What he's done is push this crisis out of the bilateral frame that Washington wanted, them versus Venezuela, where one state accuses another of crime and uses that as grounds for force, and into a multilateral frame where the question is no longer whether Venezuela trafficked drugs, but whether the United States is allowed to use its military to reorder the global distribution of oil. And OPEC cannot ignore that question, because if the United States can do it to Venezuela, it can do it to any producer that finds itself isolated or suddenly inconvenient to the US. So when Maduro writes to OPEC and says this is an attack on global energy stability, he's telling the rest of the oil-producing world that the mechanism that protects them, the collective leverage that sets supply levels and maintains their relevance, is what is really being threatened now. And OPEC knows it. They know that if the US gets access to Venezuela's reserves under a government they favor, the need for OPEC discipline completely evaporates. They know what it means when the world's largest producer also controls the world's largest reserves. It means the market bends towards Washington, not Vienna, where OPEC is headquartered, or any other OPEC member state. And it means OPEC's ability to moderate prices becomes performative and not structural. So you have a US president who is making threats without evidence, using lethal force on the high seas, ordering airspace restrictions he has no jurisdiction to impose, and signaling ground escalation. And on the other side, you now have a government saying out loud what most of the region, most of the world, frankly, already suspected, that this is not a drug operation, but a resource grab. And once you see it that way, you can see why Trump is in a much more constrained position than the swagger of his announcements suggests. Because the moment this becomes about oil, the moment OPEC is pulled into the frame, the cost of escalation rises not by a little, but by an order of magnitude. If OPEC even hints at concern or the need to manage supply carefully in light of instability in a major producing state, the price of oil ticks up. If they signal that producers view military action against a member as a threat to global output, the markets react. And if markets react, US consumers react. Trump knows what happens to presidents when petrol prices spike. They do not get rewarded for their geopolitical ambition. They get punished for domestic pain. And this is before you look at the other forces pressing on him, because this is not 1973, it's not even 2003. The US cannot simply act and expect everyone else to accommodate the consequences anymore. The Pentagon has no appetite for another open-ended intervention, particularly one in a region where US influence has eroded and where neighboring governments have already expressed deep concern, Mexico and Colombia namely. Latin America does not want a refugee crisis, does not want regional destabilization, does not want a return to the era of coups and invasions justified by slogans invented in Washington. Russia has money in Venezuelan crude and has made it clear it will defend its interests. They've already supplied the arsenals to help do that. China has significant loans collateralized against oil output. Both of those powers are operating in a global context where they're happy to challenge US assumptions of hemispheric dominance. So Trump is not looking at a cost-free escalation at all here. He's looking at a sequence of consequences that cut across diplomacy, economics, and military planning, and none of those consequences favor action on his part. The irony is that what looks like aggression from Washington reads like a weakness once the context is laid out, therefore. If Trump had evidence, he'd show it. If he had international backing, he would not be scrambling to frame drug trafficking as imminent national danger. If the maritime strikes had netted a single verifiable cartel vessel, the administration would have put the proof on every screen it could find. Instead, he's leaning on secrecy, rhetoric, and the hope that repetition will substitute for credibility. And that gives Maduro space to make the opposite case, that Venezuela is the one under attack, that the United States is acting unlawfully, that the world's oil producers need to defend the principle that a state's resources cannot be taken by force under the cover of security language. And because this accusation is not outlandish, but consistent with decades of documented US behavior, the burden of proof ends up on Washington. And Washington has not met it. I very much doubt it can either. The question then is whether Maduro has actually neutered Trump's invasion threats or whether he has merely exposed them as bluff stacked upon bluff. And the answer sits in the structure of the incentives. Trump can still escalate. Nothing in international law will physically stop him. But escalation now carries political and economic consequences that were not present until Maduro reframed the crisis. If oil prices rise because the United States destabilizes a major producer, Trump owns that price rise. If markets wobble because traders look at the Caribbean and see risk rather than routine, Trump owns the wobble. If Latin American governments condemn US action and force Washington into diplomatic isolation in its own hemisphere, then Trump owns that humiliation too. And if Russia and China take advantage of the crisis to advance their own interests, well, Trump owns that geopolitical own goal as well. At which point the question is no longer whether Trump is willing to wage war, but whether he's willing to pay the price of it. The point here is not that Maduro is powerful enough to stop the United States, but that he has used the tools available to him to change the strategic environment. He's taken Trump's justification and turned it into an indictment. He's taken a US military posture and connected it to the oil politics the entire world very well understands. He's forced OPEC to acknowledge that one of its members is under threat in a way that destabilizes the global energy system. And once OPEC is in the frame, Washington is no longer dealing with a single state, but with a collective that can influence the one thing US presidents fear more than diplomatic condemnation, the cost of fuel back home. That's what neutering looks like in global politics. Not preventing action absolutely, but raising the cost of that action so high that it becomes politically irrational. The open question is whether Trump now recalibrates or doubles down, because you still can't second guess this guy, can you? Because presidents caught in a bind often try to escalate rhetorically to disguise the fact they cannot escalate materially. And he's that sort on steroids, isn't he? And that's what this situation now looks like. The United States has the power to strike Venezuela again, to push deeper, to make the threat real. But the strategic environment has shifted under Trump's feet, and he's now carrying the burden of proof rather than Caracas. Maduro has given the world a narrative that explains the US posture in simple, recognizable terms. Oil politics, resource extraction, military coercion. And that narrative has traction because it fits the facts better than anything Trump has offered. And once the narrative is lost, the whole justification collapses. And once the justification collapses, escalation becomes a liability, not a statement of strength. And the thing you notice when a justification collapses is that the power built on that justification begins to look performative. Because if the United States truly believed this was an urgent threat to its security, it would not be relying on percentages without evidence. It would not be hiding the supposed intelligence that underpins lethal strikes. And it would not be calling on airlines to obey airspace orders the US has no legal authority to issue. That's not how a confident state behaves, is it? This is how a state behaves when it's trying to will a narrative into existence that doesn't exist, and hoping nobody strong enough to challenge it will step in and force the real conversation. Well, Maduro has stepped in. OPEC has been invited into the conversation for a chat too. And the United States now finds itself having to defend not the legality of its actions, but the credibility of its story, which is much harder to maintain when the facts are either missing completely or point in a different direction entirely. Because the moment this crisis becomes all about the oil, the burden shifts. Oil producers understand threats to reserves because they have lived through decades of coercion and sanctions and blockades and wars dressed up as security interventions. Latin America understands it particularly because the region has spent generations dealing with the consequences of resource extraction dressed up as democracy promotion. Markets understand it because they move not on rhetoric, but on structural risk. And destabilizing the country with the largest oil reserves on the planet is very much a structural risk. So when Maduro says out loud that the United States is trying to seize Venezuela's oil, he's not simply rebuking Trump. He's giving everyone watching a coherent explanation for what they are seeing. And that explanation does not require a leap of faith at all. It requires only that you look at the historical basis of the pattern before us. And this is where the constraints tighten, because the United States is not acting in a vacuum. Latin American governments have already made it clear they do not want conflict in their region because they know what conflict brings. Refugees and instability and criminal networks exploiting the chaos and the political backlash that always follows. They know that escalation in Venezuela means escalation for them because they will be the ones dealing with the consequences, while the United States insists the operation is contained. So Washington is not just facing diplomatic displeasure, it's facing a regional resistance to a degree it has not faced in decades. And that resistance matters too, because it denies the United States the political cover it wants, the ability to frame a conflict as multilateral rather than unilateral, lawful rather than opportunistic, stabilizing rather than destabilizing. In parallel, the Pentagon is looking at this crisis through a very different lens from the rhetoric coming out of the White House. They're already stretched. They already have global commitments that are demanding more than they can comfortably supply. And they know that a land operation in Venezuela is not a controlled escalation. It's a step into a terrain that is militarily difficult, politically hostile, and strategically costly. They know that Venezuela has alliances that will complicate any intervention. And they know the price of miscalculation because they've lived through it in Iraq and Afghanistan and watched how quickly a president's confidence becomes a general's nightmare. So when Trump talks about land operations being easier, he's not speaking from a place of military briefings. He's speaking from a place of political bravado. And the people who have to execute the operation know that bravado is very, very disconnected from reality. But the financial system is perhaps the most immediate pressure point because market price in risk long before politicians admit it. And if the risk here is obvious, then OPEC so much as hints that stability in Venezuela is a priority that requires output discipline, oil prices will climb. If markets believe the conflict is likely, prices climb. And if prices climb, inflation rises, consumer confidence drops, the political conversation inside the US turns to the cost of living crisis rather than the righteousness of a foreign intervention. And Trump knows what it means to preside over rising fuel costs. It cuts into the core of his political argument that he can deliver economic stability and cheap energy. So the cost of escalation is not theoretical for him, it's immediate, it's measurable, and it's politically toxic. What this means is that Maduro's move to involve OPEC has not just internationalized this crisis now, it's weaponized the global energy system against unilateral US escalation. And that's something Washington just isn't used to. For decades, the US has acted first and dealt with market consequences later, confidence that its partners would absorb the shock. But we're not in that era anymore. That's gone. They're bygone days. The global political economy is different now. Power is distributed in ways that complicate unilateral action. And when a president in Washington threatens a resource-rich state without evidence and then signals ground escalation, the rest of the world no longer waits to see what happens. They move to protect their interests. They move to stabilize their markets. They move to prevent precedent. And that is what OPEC is being asked to do now. And that's why Trump's threats now look much weaker than his posture suggests. The deeper point here is that Maduro has shifted the question from will the US invade to can the US afford to invade? And these are not the same question. The United States still has overwhelming military capacity, but capacity is not the same as political viability. It's not the same as economic sustainability. It's not the same as diplomatic cover. And right now, Trump does not have the alignment and conditions he would need to turn rhetoric into action without paying a price that could damage him domestically and internationally, which is why you are seeing this odd mix of loud declarations and quiet stalling, because the administration wants the threat to carry weight without having to demonstrate the capability or the willingness to follow through. Now, this is why Maduro's intervention matters, because he's forced the United States to operate inside a frame it doesn't control. He's forced Trump onto the terrain of energy politics, where Venezuela has leverage and the United States has exposure. He's forced a conversation about motive rather than method. And when motive is in the spotlight, the drug war narrative looks increasingly flimsy, doesn't it? And he's given OPEC a rationale to treat US threats not as bilateral tension, but as a systemic risk to the global energy order. This is what it looks like when a smaller state uses the structure of the international system to push back against a larger one, not by matching force with force, but by reframing the cost of force so that it becomes politically self-defeating for the aggressor. The question now is whether Trump does step back. And the honest answer is that he may not, because his political ego is huge. And it's also a powerful thing. And the temptation to show strength is always present with this guy. But structural incentives are against escalation. The risks are against escalation. The markets are against escalation. The region is against escalation. And OPEC, by its very nature, is always against escalation. Which means that even if Trump wants to project dominance, the system he's operating in is pushing him towards restraint, whether he admits it or not. And that returns us to the central question all of this was built around. Has Maduro neutered Trump's invasion threats before they start? And the answer is, in the structure of global politics, yes. Not absolutely, because nothing is absolute in international relations. But materially, functionally, strategically, he's raised the cost of escalation. He's lowered the legitimacy of US claims. He's expanded the coalition that has an interest in preventing conflict and exposed the lack of evidence driving US decision-making. He's moved the debate from drug trafficking to resource extraction. And he's done it at a moment when the United States is already struggling to maintain credibility in other conflicts and is under pressure from powers who are more than willing to exploit any strategic overreach. So Trump can keep talking about land operations. He can keep talking about airspace. He can keep talking about cartel boats that never seem to materialize in the evidence record. But the window for action has narrowed. The political space has contracted. The coalition against escalation has widened. And the cost of invading Venezuela has increased to the point where even a president driven by bravado has got to think twice. And that is what neutering looks like in practice. Not a couple of bricks, not preventing action through force, but preventing action through consequence. And when the history of this moment is written, the story will not be about a confrontation between a superpower and a smaller state. It'll be about a superpower discovering that its assumptions no longer hold, that its narratives no longer dictate global interpretation, and that the days when it could seize resources under pretext that crumbled under scrutiny are long gone. It'll be about the shift from unipolarity to multipolarity, expressed not in diplomatic communiques, but in the hard mechanics of energy politics. And it'll be about the moment when Venezuela used that shift to push back against a power that thought it still controlled the script. Of course, OPEC isn't Venezuela's only play here. Military defense has been too. And to that end, Russia, as aforementioned, has come bearing gifts. So do check out the details of that story here. Please do also hit like, share, and subscribe if you haven't done so already.
Well, did the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, commit a war crime when he allegedly ordered the secondary strike on shipwrecked civilians? They destroyed the boat, and then, according to reports from the Washington Post, The Intercept, and others, that Hegseth said that Hegseth ordered there to be another strike to kill those in the water. Now, initially, the White House denied that Hegseth was even aware of the attack at all. Then that kind of fell apart. They had to kind of backtrack on that when video emerged from Fox News showing Hegseth live on television admitting that he watched the whole thing live. Watch.
So the president is sending a message to other cartels, right?
A very clear one. I can tell you that was definitely not artificial intelligence. I watched it live. We knew exactly who was in that boat. We knew exactly what they were doing, and we knew exactly who they represented. And that was Tren de Aragua, a narco-terrorist organization designated by the United States, trying to poison our country with illicit drugs.
Okay, so knew exactly who was on the boat, knew everything about it, watched it live. No problems in seeing it at all. So that was then. This is now. Today, Hegseth was asked about it during the president's cabinet meeting. Here he was. His response said, this whole story is just fake news. Watch.
We're proud to do it.
So you didn't see any survivors, to be clear, after that first strike?
I did not personally see survivors, but I stand, because the thing was on fire. It was exploded and fire and smoke. You can't see anything. You got digital. This is called the fog of war. This is what you in the press don't understand. You sit in your air-conditioned offices or up on Capitol Hill and you nitpick and you plant fake stories in the Washington Post about kill everybody, phrases on anonymous sources not based in anything, not based in any truth at all. And then you want to throw out really irresponsible terms about American heroes, about the judgment that they made. I wrote a whole book on this topic because of what politicians and the press does to warfighters. President.
So now I saw everything. Now there's the fog of war, and we couldn't see anything because it was all smoky and fiery. And he said digital at one point. I don't know what that meant. Anyway, we wanted to ask Judge Andrew Napolitano about this, the host of Judging Freedom, who knows more about the law than just about anyone I know. And to help us wrangle this question, is this a war crime? Judge, great to see you. Welcome back to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm smiling a little bit because I think your audience knows that, but the show on which he appeared, Fox and Friends, was from time to time hosted by him, by you, and by me. Right. I mean, as Yogi Berra said when he learned the mayor of Dublin was a Jew, only in America. I mean, this is just
it's crazy.
Too much, but
yeah, it's got to feel weird, right? I mean, so here we are talking about someone that we used to work with, but you know, the news is the news, and trying to sift through the. I have no agenda on this.
Unfortunately for him and for the people in the boats who are dead, he has directed the military to engage in war crimes. Now, you are asking me, so we are clear, if it is a war crime that he ordered, if he did order the killing of the two survivors. The short answer is yes. The longer answer is it's a war crime to attack the boats, period. And again, a war crime to kill the survivors. The boats and the people on them, even if they're doing what he says they're doing, which is transporting illegal drugs, A, they're in international waters, B, they are speedboats with a maximum distance of 50 to 60 miles, C, they're 1,500 miles from the United States. Does the United States have the legal ability to stop a boat in international waters? Absolutely not. It would need to wait until these boats reached what the U.S. claims, which is the most that any country claims, the 12-mile limit. Some countries claim 2, some countries claim 3, some countries claim 12. I'll give you the 12. But outside that 12-mile limit, stopping a boat on the high seas is an act of piracy. That's not me. That's 3 treaties that the United States has signed. If the Defense Department, which is not engaged in law enforcement, but if it is, because the president told them to be, is convinced that these people are transporting drugs to the United States, they must wait until those drugs get into international waters and then stop the boats. If the boats engage in violence during the act of stopping, then of course the people doing the stopping, whether it's the Navy or the Coast Guard, can engage in violence back. But waging war, using instruments of war in international waters against people who are not engaged in violence is a federal crime. If a crime from the state in which it was ordered, so I don't know where Pete Hegseth was, probably Virginia, which is where the Pentagon is at the time he issued these orders. It gives rise to prosecution in the United States. There's no statute of limitations for murder. It gives prosecution, rise to prosecution in the countries where the victims are from, and it gives rise to prosecution in international courts in The Hague. These are not even close calls.
So there's no ambiguity at all. Like, you're not on the fence about this at all.
No, there's no ambiguity. If they had weapons and they were shooting at the drones or the missiles or the helicopters that were following them, that would be a different story. But where there is no weaponry being waged at the United States has no legal authority to kill, no matter what the president calls them. I mean, this phrase narco-terrorists Clayton, is a political phrase. It's not a legal phrase. There's no definition of it or use of it in American law. Simply labeling people by a word that sounds terrible. Admittedly, it does sound terrible. Narco-terrorist. Labeling them that does not create any additional extra constitutional authority for the president to authorize the kills.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. I mean, because we were boogeymen scared into this Tren de Aragua, and I'll admit I maybe fell for it in the run up to the election. Tren de Aragua, they're everywhere. They're taking over apartment complexes. Turns out, not really, but in one particular area of Aurora, Colorado. But it wasn't like an epidemic. Really wanted to look at the Mexican drug cartels. Maybe that's a totally different issue you should be looking at. But Tren de Aragua was suddenly like everywhere. It's everywhere. They're coming to your house tonight. And I'll admit, I kind of fell for it. And so by that law, by this idea that they're not, why wouldn't we just have ICE grabbing their machine guns, going right down the street and just shooting at all of these Tren de Aragua guys right in the head? Wouldn't it be the same thing as bombing their boats in the waters?
It would be the same thing. I mean, if the police in Chicago or Denver or Newark witness a major drug transaction, can they kill the distributor? Of course not. Their job is to arrest the person, seize and secure the evidence, and bring that person and the evidence to prosecutors for prosecution. The same as the principle on the seas, except when you're in international waters, you have no authority to stop anybody for any reason unless they are firing at you. Then, of course, you can fire back. I was both laudatory and critical of the 6 members of Congress who made that famous or infamous, depending upon which side of the fence you're on, tape in which they said, you have a duty to disobey illegal orders. That is a correct and accurate statement of the law. The reason I was critical of them is when they were pressed on talk shows after they made that, they backed down. Well, what is an illegal order? Have you seen any illegal orders? They know damn well that an order to kill unarmed civilians is an illegal order for everybody involved. The Secretary of Defense, the Admiral, to whomever the Admiral communicated it, and whoever pulled the trigger. I know it's not a trigger, it's a button, but I'll use that phrase, whoever actually pulled the trigger. All of those people are implicated now in war crimes so long as they knew they were killing unarmed, non-violent civilians.
So you heard Hegseth there say that he watched the whole thing live. He saw it clearly. He knew everybody on the boat. He knew everything. And then you heard him today during the cabinet meeting saying, it was foggy. There's a lot of burning going on. I probably didn't see it. I did not see civilians.
I'm disappointed. And when I discussed this on air at Newsmax, I started by saying it gives me no pleasure to accuse someone that I worked with several days a week for 8 years, that I socialized with, whose now wife was actually my boss for a while at Fox. It gives me no joy to call him a war criminal. But the acts in which he engaged are clearly war crimes. And that answer he gave at the cabinet meeting was a non-answer that did nothing but attack the press for asking a question he didn't want to answer. However, when our friends and former colleagues at Fox and Friends asked him that question, he said, oh, yes, I watched the whole thing and I knew what I was doing. So which is it, Mr. Secretary?
Under the Department of Defense Law of War Manual, you can go to Section 18, specifically talks about members of the military saying no to these orders, having the ability to not move forward with illegal orders. But it also says specifically not firing upon shipwrecked individuals would be considered a war violation, a war crime. It's literally written in the Law of War Manual at the Pentagon.
Correct.
Like you could not
Now
get more specific than that.
That is a manual whose job it is Pete's, Hegseth's, to enforce. He must know what's in there. Not only may you not shoot at the shipwrecked, but you have a duty to rescue the shipwrecked, even if you caused the shipwreck. That is as clear as day. Secretary Hegseth knew that. The admiral must have known that. The SEAL Team 6 that actually followed the boat and pressed the buttons that caused the death of everybody on it first once and then second time must have known that as well. They all violated basic principles of the laws of war. They all violated federal law. And as I said, depending upon the state in which the secretary and the admiral were located at the time they made these decisions, they violated state law as well. This is not anything that's political. This is life and death. And innocent people, legally innocent, are being killed so that the administration can show how tough it is on drugs. Tough on drugs? Why did the president just pardon the biggest distributor of cocaine in the modern era today?
Right. It makes no sense. Well, and I think we've cut through the bullshit and the propaganda on this show that these people are no threat to the United States. If you really wanted to go after the drugs, you would, of course, be looking at multiple other countries, but thousands of miles away. These people are not getting into the United States. And if anything, we are facilitating it through our own CIA. So don't lie to us. We're not idiots. We can see right through this BS. But the Fox News audience, CNN, they all buy it because we're being told that they're an imminent threat to the United States. So under that idea, they're an imminent threat to the United States. President Trump has given the authority to his Secretary of War to protect the national sovereignty of the United States. That's what they will say. Is there any legal merit to that at all?
No, there's no legal merit to it at all. First of all, it's a law enforcement issue, and the military, under an 1876 law, but still valid law today, been enforced many times, is prohibited from engaging in law enforcement. And again, as I said, the president can label these people whatever he wants. His labeling of them does not give him authority to do something that the Constitution prohibits. The Constitution allows killing only under two circumstances. One, where Congress has declared war and our military is legally shooting at or attempting to kill the military of the country with which we are engaged in war. Two, where there's been due process, basically a fair jury trial with its attendant constitutional protections, a result in guilt and the death penalty lawfully imposed. Those are the only circumstances under which the government can kill. The president deciding on his own, without a declaration of war, on his own, without any due process, that somebody is deserving of death. Well, that's what kings of England did. It's one of the reasons we have a constitution, to prevent that from ever happening.
Right. I mean, you can look at the list of grievances in the bottom of the Declaration of Independence, for crying out loud. Correct. And it points out exactly those things which we don't stand for. I'll get you out of here on this, Judge. I know you got to run, but I want to talk real quick just about who would adjudicate this. I mean, where would who's going to bring charges up for war crimes? Like, is it The Hague?
I think that Congress is going to engage in very aggressive investigations. I think Secretary Hegseth will be forced out of office, and his successor will file war crimes charges against everybody in the chain of command. As for Pete himself, he could be prosecuted. I don't know. That would really be up to the Department of Justice or a state in which he was located, like I said, Virginia. The statute of limitations on these things for murder, there's no statute of limitations. The president could pardon him. That, of course, does not relieve him from international prosecution in The Hague, if he should ever go there, or prosecution in the courts of countries from which the victims came.
Yeah, it seems like these guys can skirt around all this stuff, and that's why people can continue to get away with this stuff. Unfortunately, Judge Andrew Napolitano, always great to see you. Thank you so much, my friend, for joining us on a difficult subject for sure.
It is a difficult subject, especially since we know the person involved. But thank you, Clayton. Give my best to Natalie.
Coffee. Follow me.